The future of Pokemon cards matters more now than ever before, and the real question is what happens in the next 2 to 3 years, because the only real way to describe Pokemon cards right now is volatile, though because of this volatility, it's opened a lot of questions related to the future of Pokemon collectibles. And that's why in this video, I'll be exploring the future of Pokemon cards, along with speaking about previous trends and forecasting what's to come next. Now, if we haven't met, my name's Phil and I run this Pokemon collecting and investing YouTube channel. And I've been speaking about Pokemon cards for 2 years now. And over the last 2 years of speaking about Pokemon cards, looking at different trends and seeing so many changes, talking about what's to come for Pokemon cards right now, I think is more important than ever, especially since we've had so many kind of hype waves come around within the last few years alone. Now, when speaking about forecasting, it kind of does make you think, wait, how do we actually forecast? Well, the best way is to look at previous trends, look at previous information, and then assume the same intent for the future, along with having, few variables that you can never predict. Pokemon cards have a lot of things no one could ever predict. I mean, no one would have predicted that a Magikarp would be one of the most desired cards for modern Pokemon collecting. That was really, really unique at the time because it was traditionally, either Pikachu's or, very kind of legendary Pokemon or Charizards. That was pretty much how expensive Pokemons were for such a long time. And I highly doubt anyone would have predicted that we would get a whole set featuring only Generation 5 Pokemon in the Scarlet and Violet era. And honestly, kind of in hindsight, that was a bit of a weird set. Not weird in a bad way. I mean, I actually was really cool to see that, but just super random to have Generation 5 just placed as a closing set for Scarlet and Violet with every illustration rare from the Unova region. I don't know, it was unique, and that's the thing. Pokemon cards have that where no one can predict anything, and that's why you kind of have to take that into consideration as well when looking at the future for Pokemon cards. So, that's why the first area I want to speak about is expect the unexpected to happen once again. That's the thing with Pokemon cards that can really shift and, change the trajectory for what people kind of are predicting or, expecting themselves. Some things are just random and no one can kind of really anticipate what's coming next. A good example of this was the Mega Evolution era that kind of just started out of nowhere. And I mean, sure, it didn't really come out of nowhere per se because we did have Pokemon Legends EA, but no one really thought that the Scarlet and Violet era would be closing that chapter and then moving on to a whole new Mega Evolution era. Everyone would have just expected that we would get some sort of Mega Evolution cards sprinkled in with, the Scarlet and Violet era as it goes on to Generation 10. That was a big shift for collecting. That made a lot of collectors realize, hold on, we've just reset a new era. And that was something that no one could predict, right? Same thing as I was saying about the Generation 5 set, or even Scarlet and Violet in general. I mean, if you look at, Generation 9, we've had a Pokemon 151, and we also had a Team Rocket set, and we also had, like I mentioned before, the Generation 5 sets. These are kind of unique sets to have in an era because, Pokemon 151 really doesn't have anything to do with Generation 9. It's a totally focused on Generation 1. Same thing with Black Bolt White Flare. That's totally focused on Generation 5. It's literally only Gen 5 Pokemon. And then even, Destined Rivals, it does have so much drawback to Team Rocket, who are not even featured at all in anything to do with Generation 9 whatsoever. So these things, you can't just take things too much for face granted. Though in terms of the future, I actually do think that, going on, or whether it be Generation 10 onwards or more of this Mega Evolution era, we will see something come out of left field that changes the landscape for collecting, and you need to be prepared for that. And what that means is, you can right now be collecting certain kind of eras of Pokemon cards, or you can kind of try get ahead of the curve. One thing you don't want to be doing is when the trend comes through, or when people start hyping a certain thing, you don't want to then kind of jump on that trend, which is what most people do. Most people see the trend, they jump on it because they're like, oh, now it's kind of shifted. Now the market's kind of going in that kind of direction. Now I'm going to follow the herd. What you really want to be doing is, hey, take a broader overview. The best way to do that, and I personally feel the best way to research Pokemon cards and actually get good at predicting Pokemon cards, is by playing the video games. The reason why is when you actually play the games and you kind of learn the lore and you kind of learn what's kind of happening with Pokemon, you can kind of make kind of sense of what's going to be popular, okay? One big thing I've been expecting for a while, and you would have heard me say it on my channel before, but I do believe Gigantamax Pokemon will have a time where they start climbing in price, because you got to remember, when you look at the Nintendo Switch and you look at the amount of sales the Switch had, it was a huge console, okay? Pretty much Pokemon got a massive boost with Pokemon Sword and Shield. Even when you look at Generation 7 sales versus Generation 8, Generation 8 sold wild amounts. And because of that, so many, younger generations would have started with Sword and Shield, and they make connection points. When those connection points happen, as years go on, I'm talking 10 or 15 years down the line, people get very nostalgic for that. And Gigantamax, while it wasn't liked when it released, I do imagine that, all those kids that were growing up, all they knew was Gigantamax. They probably didn't even know the Mega Evolution era, so they won't exactly have a nostalgic connection point to that, but they will for Gigantamax. And that's just one example I'm using, though it's definitely a scenario that could play out in the future that, if Gigantamax is reintroduced in something in a Pokemon video game, or if they explore it again, later down the line, or there's a new Legends game that focuses on Gigantamax, then guess what? All those old Gigantamax cards from Generation 8, they can definitely get a bit of a boost in price because that's when the nostalgia hits. That's when people thought, I thought these were junk. But of course, right now, most of those cards are super, super affordable. Now, also, just a quick one. If you do collect Pokemon cards and you love tracking the market, then I do want to speak about the Collector app, who have kindly sponsored today's video. Collector lets you update your collection within the app, and it also updates the pricing data with real-time market updates based on recently sold listings. Now, Collector also has a very useful trade analyzer feature because you can actually upload what you're trading versus what you're getting, and it will show you how fair the trade is based on the current market. Trading is not just about getting the exact dollar value every time. I mean, there's a lot of other aspects such as the social aspect, but I know from experience that having a sense of whether a trade is fair or not just makes the whole process easier. Now, if you do download Collector Pro, you can just scan photos of your cards into the app using your phone's camera, and there's also a max tab to get pricing data past 1 year. Now, if you want a very clean, reliable way to understand the current Pokemon market, Collector genuinely delivers. It helps you make smarter buying decisions with all the tools they have, and it gives you a clear picture of how your cards are performing over time. You can find all the details to download the Collector app in the video's description. A massive thanks to Collector for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into it. Now, the next area is expect a supply shock with graded cards, especially with the risk of junk slabs becoming more common. So grading cards has become very, very popular, and there's been already a shift that's taken place, but I do imagine within the next 2 to 3 years, there's going to be even a bigger shift that happens. One of the big shifts right now is it's pretty much PSA 10 or get a graded 10, or everything else is kind of second best or people don't want it. In fact, one big thing that's happened, and it wasn't really that much around, in 2023 or 2024, back a few years ago, I noticed people didn't mind too much purchasing PSA 8s or 9s. Now that's shifted, right? People would rather have the raw copy than even touch a PSA 9. That has become so common right now, and that wasn't really a thing. People would say, hey, I would rather get the PSA 9 because it's protected and it's still a great quality copy. That's shifted, okay? People now want the PSA 10 or the 10 graded card or the raw copy. And that has been a pretty big shift in terms of grading market and grading in general. And a lot of people, when they get PSA 9s back sent to them right now, they crack it open. They don't even want it in the slab. And it's crazy, right? Because you've kind of paid, you've still got a very high grade. It just hasn't got the 10 grade, right? And that's been a shift. But I do imagine even in a few years, we're going to see so many junk slabs. And people right now, the people are hyper fixated on PSA 10s. And I think that's only going to grow. And not just PSA 10s, but even like the highest quality they can get of a card. And I think the big reason for that is most people now collect with intent. Almost no one opens a pack of Pokemon cards without penny sleeves and top loaders next to them. That, of course, back in the day, never happened. People would open them anywhere. You'd open them pretty much while you're walking from, if you bought like, as a kid, if your parents bought you like a Pokemon booster pack, you'd be opening it in the store pretty much as soon as you walked out. You wouldn't care, and then you'd just hold on to the cards. That doesn't happen anymore, right? Everyone now knows, like, hey, if I pull something that's worth, insane amount of money, some cards, they're selling $500, $600 raw straight away. Well, of course, people have penny sleeves and top loaders, they protect them straight away. So this junk slab era is going to get bigger, and, people try to offload these, but they might have a very hard time doing so as well because, people and collectors, they have matured a lot. And in that maturity of them noticing that they've become picky with what they want high quality. And they also understand that, hey, if I purchase high quality and if I buy it today, it has the highest chance of growth in the future if it does grow in value. And I do think this junk slab era is going to get bigger, and I think a lot of people are just going to be learning to crack open slabs, and they pretty much only want PSA 10s. That's already happening now, but I can only imagine in the future, literally, unless it's vintage, I'm not sure how much PSA 9s or anything in grade 9s are going to be even worth anything, or they're going to probably have a harder time selling it because, like I said, the shift right now that's taken place is people want the highest grade, and if they don't get the highest grade, they would rather have the raw copy. And it's just a weird thing that's kind of happened recently, but I think in the future, it's even going to get bigger. And because of that, there might even become more tools that come available to ensure that you get the highest chance for a 10. We're already seeing things like centering tools coming around and all these things, like people are like uploading photos of their cards to certain, websites to see how well it's centered, to make sure that even before they send it to get graded, is it going to get a 10? And with AI and everything, I think there'll be a big market that, shifts towards the 10 grades, and, everything before would just be raw, or otherwise. People just do not want to get modern cards in lower grades than 10. Now, the next area is expect vintage Pokemon cards to become far more desired over modern. And I think this will continue for a long time because vintage Pokemon cards are kind of where the scarcity actually lies. Modern is going through overproduction, along with people, are looking after their cards far better now than they ever did before. And I've always found that vintage Pokemon, it's kind of weird because, you have to have a certain person that likes purchasing them, and it has to be almost the person that has heavy research, and they have to know their Pokemon cards because they have to go back and go through a journey of searching those cards. But I think vintage Pokemon cards are just super interesting because, most of them, if you look at a lot of like anything from Neo Genesis, if we look at pop reports, they're low. Like I'm talking really low. When you look at modern Pokemon cards, their pop reports are very high in comparison. Now, the big thing is there's also a big market shift because vintage Pokemon cards, or the amount of people that like collecting vintage, is probably smaller. And the reason for that is, number one, the artworks are probably not as interesting. Well, they're not. They're objectively not as interesting as anywhere near compared to modern artworks, especially from Generation 8 onwards and Generation 9. Artworks have just become better and better. They've really leveled up. Unless you have an established connection with vintage cards, I do think it's hard for a modern collector to look at vintage and say, whoa, I really want that in my collection. The only reason they would want a vintage card in their collection is because people have hyped it up for them, and it's kind of like they're connected to it. Most people who like collecting vintage collected those cards as kids, and then when they look at it, it brings back, warm memories. Nostalgia, dude. Everyone knows how nostalgia works. It is a weird feeling. You're kind of trapped in this weird hazy memory of the past, and it's a dangerous thing too, right? That's why vintage kind of grows, because nostalgia is this thing. A lot of us get hypnotized and think that, hey, if we buy something from our childhood, or if we collect something from a long time ago, that's gonna provide some sort of fulfillment for us. That's gonna kind of take us back there, but you're never gonna get that time back. You can see the photos, but you're never gonna go back there, and that's why you gotta think ahead. Thinking ahead in life is very important, because sometimes, and this is one of my things that Pokemon cards, one of my things that actually, like, I'm just being real with you, I actually find it sometimes hard to collect a lot, because when I look back at vintage cards, while I like seeing them, I actually sometimes get sad when I think about it, because it's like, wow, why do so many millennials and so many, even Gen Z, like, we're so connected to things of our childhood or things from back then? And I think a lot of it, and I'm just being real with you, has to do with the fact that the future now for us doesn't look as prosperous as it once did for a lot of young people. Right? When we were growing up as kids, the future looked so bright, man. Like I remember as a kid, like everything was, like technology was booming, things were going to be amazing. But now when we look at the future, there's just so many risks that people kind of like AI, like that's actually, like, I know everyone says, oh, AI is going to be like taking jobs, but that's kind of a big threat, right? And I think that's why vintage cards are always going to have a place with people, because that's the big reason why vintage will continue to grow, because people see nostalgia is just a heavy, intoxicating feeling to people. And it makes people do it makes people spend a lot because they try and catch what's before. And I do think, and like I said, I do think a big part of that is because millennials just have the future of what we're looking forward to is so like just unpredictable. And even though the future's always been unpredictable, I think, I don't think it's crazy to say that right now we're in a very like hazy period for what's to come. We just don't know what's going to come. It's just so much more kind of freaky now when you look at the future with everything that's happening. AI is such a big thing. People are just a bit more worried about what's happening now. And I think that's why, nostalgia has become such a big thing with everything. Like back in the day, movies were about new movies. Video games used to be about what new video games are coming out. Now everyone wants remakes. People are just obsessed with remakes. And even like, I think it was Vince Vaughn, he was talking about it. I mean, even now they're saying that studios don't want to sign off on a new movie. They would rather sign off on established IPs. So what's this happen? Why has this change happened with people? A video game, like a brand new, fresh video game is so rare because it's like, no, we trust the established IP. If we're going to invest $200-300 million in creating a video game, or if we're going to invest $200 or $300 million in making a movie, we'd rather have an established IP rather than try something different. And I think that's why vintage cards have that kind of allure, because, you know, people just go back to that place. Though I think, you know, modern one day will become vintage as well. It's something to keep in mind. Now, another area is expect sealed product to stop being the golden ticket to success, because sealed products have always been seen as the safe purchase. I'm saying that because I'm lacking the better word, though that will be changing drastically in the next few years as just too many people are aware of sealed. You see, I remember a few years ago, sealed product, you know, there was a very small amount of people that purchased sealed. And like, I know that a lot of people, like on forums, it was like an echo chamber because everyone would be like, hey, we're all purchasing sealed. But like even the Pokemon investing Reddit forum, you know, back then, I remember it was like 10 or 15,000 people in that. That's such a small amount of people. I mean, compare that to today, that place has boomed in popularity. Even the term Pokemon investing on Google Trends has spiked in popularity because it's become more popular. And that means sealed investing, or people that purchase sealed product, has become really mainstream. So, you know, that day of buying sealed product and, you know, you thought you were doing something clever, that used to be a clever decision because it was actually a small amount of people that did that. Right now, it's not a small amount of people. Nearly every collector is purchasing sealed. There is so many people who have a singles collection and a sealed collection. And because of that, I do think sealed products will start having a lot of market volatility that people haven't seen before. And when that volatility happens, I think it will be a big changing landscape for collectibles. One big thing about sealed product, yes, it's great, yes, it's interesting, though because it's always had this kind of stable, it just keeps climbing in price traditionally, that's made a lot of people, I think, over leverage themselves. Though I think in the next few years, we're going to see sealed product also have a lot of volatility, and that's going to make people a little bit more bearish on just overspending on sealed product, especially when they're paying above market price. I mean, if you can get it at retail price, sure, but you know, that's been also a challenging thing over the last few years. So we really need to see where the future of the hobby will go, though there's going to be a lot of interesting things that happen within 2026 and beyond, and the next few years, I think, will be big years for Pokemon collecting in general. But you know, even though the future of Pokemon collectibles is an important topic, what's more important is having the right budget mindset when it comes to collecting. There's actually 4 key areas to save money when buying Pokemon cards, and I explain those 4 in this video here. Within this video on screen, I explain the importance of collecting on a budget. Click the video that's appearing on screen to learn more about that topic. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next video.